Okay, so I'm quite glad now that you've engaged with that to some extent and you're thinking about colour and how it works. I want to talk now, this portion of the class, about some more things you can do in CSS. We're not going to look at more styles. Actually, you know, there are lots and lots of different styles you can apply or not apply, and you can Google those and look them up. What I'm interested in looking at here is more ways to select the kinds of things that you want to style. And so we're going to look at contextual selectors, they're called. We're going to look at classes, and we're going to look at IDs. Okay? So if we look up top there's something that you're familiar with. Here we're saying the selector part of the rule here is saying B. So this is all the bold tags. Wherever there's a bold tag in this document, I want the content bounded by those B tags to be in blue. This is all online anyway, but you can take it down. Just whatever you want to do is fine. But maybe it's more important to listen. Now, next up then, we have a P followed by a B in the selector part. And this is saying wherever you have a P that's inside in a B. Sorry, wherever you have a B that's inside in a P. I knew I'd say it the wrong way around. Wherever you have a B that's inside in a P, we want the color to be red. So that will apply to bold tags only if they're nested inside in P tags. And here where we have span P, B, and then that's going to be in green, that will only apply to a B tag, that's inside in a P tag, that's inside in a span tag. But there may be times when you want to be that specific. You might decide, for example, that wherever you have an anchor tag, you want it to be in red and underlined. But you might conclude that that looks really, really ugly when it's in a list. So you might say, well, wherever I have an anchor tag that's inside in a list item, I want it to be something else. You might decide you don't want it to be underlined, for example. So those are contextual selectors, where you can apply a style to something that's inside something else. These get even more complicated. Here we're saying we have P greater than B. And here what we're saying is that this is applied to a B tag that's inside in a P tag, but only if it's a direct child of the P tag. So if it's a B inside a div inside a P, there'll be a grandchild that doesn't apply. So it has to be directly inside, just one level underneath it, one layer inside. Now, classes and IDs then can operate independently of the document hierarchy. Okay? And I'll show you what we're talking about here. So here we have a H1, and inside in the H1 tag, so this is actually inside in the HTML now, which is why it's it's not ideal, because we're fiddling now with the HTML. All of the stuff we did up to now left our HTML document nice and clean, and here now we're starting to clutter up the HTML document a bit, but there's no other way to do this. So here we're saying we have a H1, and that's class important. So this tag now is considered, that class is set to important. It has a class attribute. Then we have a regular div, and then we have a div that's also class important. Now if we look at this CSS here, we're saying wherever you have a div, we want the font family to be sans serif. And you can see here that both divs are in sans serif. Now this one is in serif font. And this dot important here is saying that wherever you have a tag that has the class important, this is going to apply to it. So it applies irrespective of what kind of tag it is. anything that has the class important is going to be in bold and in red. And that's what's happened here. You can even be more specific and you can say div.important, and then that will apply to any div that has the class important. Now, the regular div stuff still applies. So in this case, once again, both divs are in sans serif. But the divs that are important will have the bold and red. So here you have kind of a connection between the HTML and the CSS file. There's a bit of overlap there between them in terms of who's doing the job. This is all happening in the HTML. Now, an ID then is a bit more specific. Okay. And here in the middle, in the second line there, we have div ID equals start. Now, each ID can only be used once in the HTML document. So it's a unique identifier for that tag. So that tag is called start, and here we're saying that the thing that's called start, whatever it is, that tag gets italics and green. Now, the regular div stuff still applies to both divs, so that's why they're both sans serif, but only the one called start gets the color green and italics. Now, this is a bit of a problem, right? If you start using classes and IDs all over the shop, well, once again then you're going back to the scenario where your HTML is all cluttered with styling information, although strictly it's not styling information, but it becomes harder to read, it's harder to see what's going on. So you should be wary of using classes and IDs. It may be possible if you use the contextual selectors carefully to do the same job that you might be doing with a class or an ID. Now, for the work you're going to do for this module, it's probably inevitable that you will have to use classes, but I wouldn't foresee any scenario in which you would have cause to use an ID. So if you use an ID tag, well, actually no, I tell a lie. You probably use IDs as well, so scrap that. Okay? But you don't want to go mad. If you have too many classes and too many IDs, you're really just back to the bad old days. You're just calling it CSS, but it's bad as it ever was. Okay? So what I want to show you now is my timetable once again. But in this case, I have, for each of the classes, I've given each class a class. It's an unfortunate choice of confusion. But so for networking, I've given it the class net. And for the web class, I've given it a class web. And for, that's all I've done. Okay. So I gave the networking classes a class called net. And then inside in the CSS, I have the usual stuff about the table and the caption and the TD and whatever. But I've also said here, wherever you have a TD that's of the class net, I want the background color to be this. And wherever you have a TD that has the class web, I want the background color to be this. So then that allows me to color code the timetable. So if we look here, the networking ones are green and the web ones are gray. So you could see how you could build up your timetable much like you had before, except you can have all the classes color coded. So I think that's pretty cool. So maybe you could work on that now. To do that now, you need to go back to modify your HTML. So you need to give each class or each module you have a separate class in the TD tag. And then you can color code those then by class in the CSS. So it involves modifying the HTML document, which is something we haven't done before. We've been very strict about that. We haven't gone near the HTML document up to now. Modifying the HTML document and then adding some CSS. And maybe you can still play with your colors in your color chart there to get some cool colors. So maybe you can combine your playing with the RGB system and playing with the CSS. It's possible actually in CSS to use this syntax here, I hope, RGB, open brackets, 255, 128, 128, say, whoops. So you can actually use the RGB values instead of converting to hexadecimal, I think. There you go. That lovely shade of pink is red, 255, green, 128, blue, 128. So you can plug your RGB values in there directly. You don't have to go to hexadecimal if you don't want. The HTML, we say something like this. Okay? So you'll put a class into each TD tag that you want to style differently.